My friends, today we will take a look at the frontline situation in Kharkiv Oblast. This part of the front up north that the mainstream media barely talks about. Spoilers, what's happening there is not good. In the last 2 months, our beloved Ukrainskaya Armia was unable to dislodge the Russian 6th Combined Arms Army that was entrenched along the banks of the Oskil River. Every Ukrainian assault broke like foam against granite. Even worse, after blocking these strikes, the Russians surged forward and expanded their area of control once again. And that's not all. While all this was taking place, Russian forces also launched a three-pronged amphibious operation north of the Oskil River. And according to the latest news, Russian assault detachments have captured the village of Kamianka.
Leave me alone!
At least we know one thing for sure. British officers did not plan this river crossing operation for the Russian army. We would have had the disastrous and stubborn assaults on Krinky. Exclusive footage of British officers trying to understand how not to F up an amphibious landing. About this entire Russian offensive, pro-Ukrainian newspaper Radio Svoboda reported, "The Russian army is approaching Kupyansk from the north, 3 kilometers left." At the same time, Ukrainian journalist Butusov wrote the following on Telegram. "The critical situation on the Limansky front requires immediate managerial and organizational decisions. Otherwise, the front on the Oskil will collapse." And what happens if the Oskil front collapses? Well, put simply, Kupyansk is gone.
Another fuck up. Another fuck up.
Oh, but that's not all. The worrying thing is how the Russian command seems to have transferred numerous brigades and divisions from Kursk all the way to Kharkiv Oblast. All I can tell you is that it's gonna be a heavy metal festival for Ukraine this summer. Welcome to History Legends, and here are the latest news of the Russo-Ukraine war. If you're new to this channel, make sure to like and subscribe. As you know, some of my Ukraine war videos have been targeted with limited or no ads. So make sure to check out my Patreon or PayPal to keep the show running. Thank you to everyone that has already helped, and welcome to the headquarters. What I suggest is that we go back to when I last covered this part of the front in early March. That was the frontline situation along the Oskil River by the 3rd of March 2025. The Russian command of the 6th Combined Arms Army secured a set of bridgeheads along a 15-kilometer portion on the western side of the river. By then, Russian forces had almost fully taken control over Dvorichna, a strategic village since it's located at the center of one of the bridgeheads. But if you remember, that was not the only place where the Russians struck. This time we'll have to look 22 kilometers northeast of Dvorichna. There, the Russians also disembarked forces near the settlement of Topoli, located right along the Russian border. To achieve all these gains, the Russian 6th Army only made use of infantry units, which allowed mobility, facilitated river crossing operations, and decreases the overall chances of Russian troops being detected by Ukrainian drones. To defend this 35-kilometer front, the Ukrainian command positioned the 151st Mechanized Brigade just outside Topoli, and the 5th Mountain Assault Battalion near Fiholivka. In this video, you can see 2 soldiers from this unit, call signs Shuba and Sova, who are said to have defended their trench lines, their foxholes, for 90 days in a row. I don't know if it's a feat of arms or if they simply didn't have anyone else to replace them. Next to them was the 5th Slobozhanska Brigade of the National Guard. The 40th Separate Rifle Battalion was covering the T-2114 road. Further south, the Ukrainians positioned the 112th and 117th Territorial Defense Brigades just outside Dvorichna. Behind them, the 143rd Mechanized Brigade. The access to Kupyansk was protected by the 116th Mechanized Brigade as well as the 15th Counterattack Brigade of the National Guard. Further to the rear, the 3rd Tank Brigade remained in reserve in Shipuvate. We can clearly see how the northern part of the Oskil River was lightly defended compared to the southern part. It was done on purpose to prevent the Russians from pushing south towards the strategic city of Kupyansk, especially considering that forward elements of the Russian army were only 3 to 5 kilometers away from the first houses of Kupyansk. Because of this threat directly outside Kupyansk, on the 4th of May, the Ukrainians counterattacked and regained this 1.3 square kilometer forest north of Zapadne. It was a great tactical success. This forest is equivalent to 180 football fields. So imagine the number of troops that can be concentrated and hidden there. Meaning for the Ukrainians, this force will play an important role as a rally point before launching their counterattacks towards Zapadne. Talking about that, right at the same time, a Ukrainian column planned to storm Zapadne but was stopped just outside the village. As you can see here, the Ukrainians left behind as a donation to the God Emperor a BMP-1, a UAZ 452 van, and a Swedish Bandwagon 206 tracked all-terrain vehicle. While this southern part of the bridgehead was under heavy pressure, on the 6th of March, Russian detachments positioned near Novomlinsk managed to expand their area of control northwards. Now at this point, it's really important to understand the topography of the battlefield. As you can see on this 3D map, the Russians pushed 2 kilometers along this chalky ridgeline overlooking the entire Oskil River. This means Russian reinforcements will be able to cross over to the west bank, whoops, not that one, without facing direct enemy fire. As you can see, it had high tactical value. So it was then easy for the Russian reinforcements, all these battalions, to reinforce the bridgeheads, right? On the 10th of March, the Ukrainians also counterattacked in this forestry north of Kupyansk and pushed the Russians back 3 kilometers. As you can see, the goal was to swing north and cut off the Russian bridgeheads from their supply lines. And let's be honest, this area around Sinkivka is really cursed for the Russian army. There must be something buried in this area because it's not normal that the Russians keep getting L's around there. In the morning of the 14th of March, the men of the Ukrainian 8th Mountain Assault Battalion gathered for a quick prayer. Moments later, they counterattacked the enemy in Fiholivka and knocked out the Russians from the settlement. The Russian bridgehead around Dvorichna was seriously getting cornered. The situation was critical. The Russian command of the 6th Army only had 2 options left. Either reinforce the southern bridgehead and regain the lost positions immediately, or, option 2, depressurize the sector by attacking somewhere else along the Oskil River and force the Ukrainians to disperse their reserves. On the 15th of March, some Russian rifle teams crossed the river 13 kilometers north of Dvorichna, beyond the settlement of Petrivka. They ended up consolidating a bridgehead along a 2-kilometer portion of the river. Due to the weak Ukrainian response, by the 19th, this grouping secured the ridgeline and broke through 3 kilometers into these forested areas. As you can see on this 3D map, they pushed right into this gap between the 2 ridgelines. To the right stood the village of Kamianka, home to less than 1,000 people before the war. It was an important tactical objective because it was the largest settlement in the entire area. To keep the momentum going, Russian drone operators also destroyed camouflaged Ukrainian antennas to blind their command staff. Part of the reason that could explain why the Ukrainians couldn't counterattack immediately is because further south, heavy fighting took place around Fiholivka, as Russian counterattacks pinned down a number of Ukrainian reserves. In this footage, you can see small Russian fire teams attempting to regain the settlement and infiltrate Ukrainian positions. But these attempts were targeted by Ukrainian bomber drones of the 5th Brigade Slobozhanska, as well as Ukrainian artillery. Is it me, or drones have turned warfare into hide and seek? 2 days later, the light aviation of the 151st Mechanized Brigade targeted Russian troops attempting to push out of the village of Zapadne. The settlement of Dvorichna was equally targeted and covered by swarms of FPV and bomber drones. This fixed a considerable number of Russian troops and prevented them from pushing out of Dvorichna. From the Russian command's perspective, something had to be done ASAP, or the bridgehead would collapse on its own. On the 22nd of March, the Russian 6th Combined Arms Army launched another river crossing operation close to the Russian border, after which the settlement of Topoli was entirely mopped up. The advancing rifle teams only faced sporadic drone strikes. My theory is that they were saved by this ancient pagan sign which acted as a high-tech anti-drone shield. Meanwhile, another Russian detachment was disembarked 4 kilometers south of the village. Facing little resistance, they advanced 2 kilometers towards this road linking Topoli to Kamianka. As you can see, the village of Kamianka was now getting flanked on both sides. And then the Russians just stopped. Further south, Dvorichna kept getting bombarded, but the Russians still managed to regain control of the Sahunivka district of the village, thus officializing the full capture of the settlement on the 25th of March. Important note, disclaimer. According to the map of pro-Ukrainian deep state UA, parts of Dvorichna are still in contested territory. 2 kilometers away from the Sahunivka district, Russian drones spotted and managed to hit a Cossack 7 APC. Now, although anecdotal, this forested area around where the armored vehicle was destroyed will be an important objective for both sides to control. For the Russians, it will act as a shield to fend off Ukrainian counterattacks aimed at retaking control of Dvorichna. And for the Ukrainians, this force will be used as a stepping stone to strike right into the heart of the village. Each of these Cossack 7s can transport 7 to 8 riflemen. So this MRAP will need 6 trips back and forth to transport an entire platoon to the rally point. For sure it's longer, but it reduces the risk of being spotted by Russian drones. That way, the Ukrainian command has transferred a lot of units inside this forest to reinforce the defensive perimeter west of Dvorichna. And it's not a coincidence because towards the end of the month of March, the Ukrainian command noticed increased enemy activity inside this Dvorichna bridgehead. I mean, just check out what this Ukrainian mortar team had to say. There are drones in the sky 24/7. The unit is firing at the Russian positions in occupied Dvorichna. Essentially, at this point for the Ukrainians, the big question was, where would the Russians strike next? Everything pointed towards a Russian attack in the sector of Zapadne, as Ukrainian recon teams spotted Russian infantrymen gathering in this farm complex, which was then targeted by 2S1 Gvazdika self-propelled howitzer. Remember what I said about this exact position in my last video. As you can see at the end of the tree line, the Russians even managed to capture this farm complex. It was an ideal position to hold as it laid on elevated terrain and thus prevented any serious Ukrainian counterattack. The days went by and nothing happened. The Ukrainian command could breathe and notice that it was just a large rotation of forces and not a preparation for a large offensive. Whoops! On the 31st of March, Russian soldiers stormed Ukrainian positions and advanced another 2 kilometers, greatly expanding the bridgehead to the south.
Fuck.
Some of their forward elements even reached the settlement of Kindarashivka, 4 kilometers from their starting positions. As you can witness in the following drone strikes, it seems some of these Russian sabotage teams were spotted and then destroyed. After this Ukrainian counterattack, we have a video of a member of Ukraine's search and rescue unit saying how a couple days before the village of Kindarashivka was completely calm, but they now have to evacuate all the remaining civilians. The orcs won't come back, everything under control, but everyone should get the F out of here. Jokes aside, these strikes against Kindarashivka are nothing unexpected. Actually, I mentioned it in my last video. The biggest one seems to be Kindarashivka, so we can expect heavy fighting to take place in this area. April 2025. By the 2nd of April, this entire portion of the Oskil River between Novomlinsk and Petrivka also fell within the gray zone. That means that the only positions that the Ukrainians still held on the banks of the Oskil River was in Kamianka. That same day, footage was released of Ukrainian drones striking a Russian T-98 tank, a T-72B3 tank, and a UAZ-452 Bukhanka van. Thing is, these drone strikes happened right here, 8 kilometers beyond the contact line, near the settlement of Tavilzhanka. This could indicate a shift in the Russian strategy and how the Russian command is preparing to bring armored vehicles across the Oskil River. Now this is serious, they're preparing phase 2 of the operation. This also matched what this Ukrainian Telegram channel reported. All these attempts have so far resulted in ineffective frontal attacks and assaults with high losses. It's okay, they maybe consumed a little bit too much copium 5000, but the root of the information is interesting. That means if Russian infantry managed to secure multiple bridgeheads as part of phase 1 of this operation, it became difficult for rifle teams to push beyond these bridgeheads without armored support. On the 4th of April, the Ukrainian Phoenix unit of the State Border Service discovered an enemy sabotage team. The problem is that this was geolocated right inside Kamianka. By that point, the Ukrainians had possibly lost control over the southern part of the village. Another group was delocated 300 meters from the first one, confirming the Ukrainian staff's worst fears. A sizable Russian detachment managed to get a foothold inside the village. And the problem for Ukraine is that this settlement is located so far out from their bases that a counterattack seems unlikely. From a tactical perspective, we can believe that the Russian troops disembarked outside the village and then started infiltrating the urban area from the east, as opposed to a frontal attack involving a river crossing. Actually, it gets worse. Ukrainian drone teams also struck a number of Russian pieces of equipment located near the river, and even a 2S-5 self-propelled howitzer, thus confirming the enemy's intention to bring reinforcements and storm the settlement. It couldn't possibly get worse for Ukraine.
It's a lie.
The Ukrainian command organized an armored counterattack to flank the Russian forces that were dangerously shoving their tip inside Kindrashivka. Part of this operation involved a Ukrainian column that drove through the settlement of Holubivka, just outside Kupyansk, precisely 1,500 meters from the first buildings of the city. But then when they were out in the open, they got hammered by swarms of FPV drones. Allegedly, the personnel inside the vehicles were then ambushed by hostile small arms fire. 3 kilometers from there, another Ukrainian counterattack was halted. As you can see here, operators are inserting their toys into the back door before releasing all their explosives. This Ukrainian counterattack was huge because another column tried to storm this farm complex south of Zapadne. We see a disoriented M113 APC driving straight towards 3 anti-tank mines lying in open sight. Moments later, the vehicle gets destroyed. So in summer, the Ukrainians struck the bridgehead from 3 directions. This one in Holubivka, this one in the center in open field, and this one south of Zapadne. Unbeknown to the Ukrainians, they poked right into the bee's nest. Because 24 hours later, on the 6th of April, the Russian army launched a major offensive along the entire southern bridgehead and captured the village of Zapadne. On the 11th of April, the Ukrainian command tried to regain a foothold inside Dvorichna using a unit of foreign volunteers. Unfortunately for them, one of the 2 groups composed of 7 men, of which some New Zealanders, was ambushed and destroyed. The front didn't change much in the following days apart from drone teams pelting each other, although it's important to note that heavy fighting persisted in Kamianka. In order to dislodge the defenders, the Russians made use of ground-based kamikaze drones to blow up underground positions. Meanwhile, bomber drones were also actively being used to target mines and make them detonate before the arrival of friendly infantrymen. It's sad to say, but today a lot of NATO military forces still have not taken drones into account in their infantry tactics. As a historical example, it's like rejecting the use of arquebuses during the Renaissance. No, we'll just stick to mounted knights and archers. Otherwise, the fighting on the Oskil River was slowly shifting towards Kindrashivka, with an increasing number of Russian sabotage teams trying to infiltrate Ukrainian lines. And this time, the Russian rifle teams were supported by the Flyboys. In this footage, we see the impact of a Russian helicopter-launched air-to-surface missile against a large building in that same settlement. The building is located very close to the contact line and was allegedly used as a base for an entire team of drone operators. In the neighboring village of Radkivka, a Russian fiber optics drone managed to finish off an abandoned Cossack armored vehicle. Now the problem for the Ukrainian command is while they had to shield Kupyansk in the south, the Russians were also tickling their positions 35 kilometers to the north. On the 17th of April, Ukrainian drone operators of the 3rd Tank Brigade kept Russian forces at bay in Kamianka. But it became clear that more and more Russian units started pushing towards the Oskil River. The arrival of mechanized formations was important to be able to expand beyond the current Russian positions. So I wonder how the Russians will actually transfer all this equipment on the west bank of the Oskil River. It seems we got our answer on the same day, on the 17th of April, but this time further south in Dvorichna. There, the Ukrainians destroyed 2 BMPs trying to ford the Verkhnya Dvorichna River. Of course, the question is, was this the entire Russian force that tried to cross the river? Or there were more vehicles, but they managed to get across undetected. To support their offensive in Kharkiv Oblast and the crossing of heavy equipment across the Oskil River, it also became imperative for the Russian command to pinpoint Ukrainian artillery units. Like this 155mm Crab self-propelled howitzer that was struck by a Lancet loitering drone when it was positioned inside the village of Stetskivka, 12 kilometers from the contact line. On the 17th of April as well, clearly a busy day, some Russian soldiers pushed 3 kilometers and occupied some houses in Mala Shapkivka. But a Ukrainian assault detachment from the Counterattack brigade immediately counterattacked. While being covered by the suppressive fire of their armored vehicles, the riflemen stormed the buildings held by the enemy and cleared them one after the other, essentially leaving no chance for the defenders. But 4 days later, the Russians returned, but this time more numerous. On the 21st of April, drone footage showed how Russian forces started pushing towards the P-79 road north of Kindrashivka, around this sector as well as in this location. The loss of Kindrashivka would be extremely problematic for Ukraine, as it would essentially open the path right into Kupyansk, as the month of April was coming to an end. Russian intelligence officers observed active movement of Ukrainian armored formations in the Kupyansk direction. They explained how in this sector, such a large number of tanks and armored vehicles is a rare sight. So it was definitely something worth paying attention to. Ukraine was preparing some sort of counterattack, and every Russian rifleman was ordered to dig in. As a matter of fact, both sides were running against the clock. The Ukrainians had to act fast before the Russians could reinforce their bridgeheads, and equally the Russians had to transfer a lot of their reserves on the west bank of the Oskil River before the Ukrainian counterattack. On the 25th of April, drones of the Ukrainian 8th Mountain Assault Battalion targeted the Russian mortar team positioned right at the center of Dvorichna, thus confirming the fall of the village. Meanwhile, close to the Russian border in Kamianka, Ukrainian drone operators kept posting videos of their strikes to show that things were going well, the defense was strong, and the orcs kept getting repelled. Well, until the 28th of April, when Russian forces stormed the village of Kamianka. As you can see in this footage, in preparation of the attack, any stronghold or armored vehicle in the close proximity of the village was targeted by drones and artillery. After that, it was a multitude of small Russian rifle teams that mopped up the buildings one by one. However, in many cases, instead of entering the buildings to secure them, the Russian assault detachment simply blew them up. Like this soldier that attached an anti-tank mine to a rope that he then swung inside the house. Moments later, it detonated. Using the same method, all the buildings were cleared from their occupants. Otherwise, the assault team simply pummeled grenades into dugouts to score 3-point field goals, while others preferred the good old RPGs. This goes to show that in real-life urban battles, most soldiers prefer to avoid CQB. Just blow up the entire place and move on to the next house. And whoever of the defenders survived the initial assault was then captured. A couple hours later, Kamianka fell under Russian control. As you can see here, the flag of the Russian Federation was raised in 2 locations of the settlement. With the fall of Kamianka, the entire Oskil River, going from the north of Kupyansk to the Russian border, was under Russian control. May 2025. This section is going to be short because it seems that both the Ukrainian and Russian forces positioned along the Oskil River took a tactical pause. We only have some footage from the 3rd of May, where Ukrainian drones from the 151st Mechanized Brigade harassed Russian troops positioned in and around Zapadne. In summary, this was the frontline situation along the Oskil River in early March, and that was the situation 2 months later. I know, I agree, not very spectacular, but the Russian army still managed to secure the village of Dvorichna and Kamianka. This is not some small amphibious raid, but all these strikes are shaping operations in preparation of a much bigger offensive. The big question is, in what direction will the Russians focus their attention? Are they going to shift their forces to the south to take Kupyansk? Or are they going to prefer to focus their attention on the lightly defended Ukrainian positions on the northern part of the river? We also learned that it was the 344th Motorized Rifle Regiment that captured the settlement of Kamianka. This regiment is part of the 57th Motor Rifle Brigade, which operates under the 5th Combat Arms Army. You heard that well, 5th Combat Arms Army and not 6th. We might have our answer in this following Telegram post, where we learned that the Russian command transferred the 6th Combat Arms Army from the Oskil River to Belgorod. So it seems that the Russian Army command organized a massive rotation of forces. On top of that, units previously deployed in Kursk also appeared in the Oskil River sector. Since there are no forests along the Russia-Ukraine border, it's impossible to concentrate large formations there without being detected. However, this can be done along the forested banks of the Oskil River. Something is brewing here. That's all I have for you today. Let me know in the comment section what you thought of my analysis. If you're new to this channel, make sure to like and subscribe. And if you want to support my work, make sure to check out my Patreon or PayPal. The links are in the description below.